The 1960s was a great decade to be a kid prone to obsessions. In addition to the dawn of the Marvel Age of comics, we had the James Bond spy craze, the Batman TV show phenomenon, the British invasion starring the Beatles, a plethora of World War II TV shows and movies, and we had monsters. Lots and lots of monsters. And because of that, I'm happy to confess, I was a 1960s monster kid. Welcome back to Tales from My Spinner Rack. I'm Gary Sassman, the former Director of Programming and Publications for Comic-Con International San Diego. This is episode 24 of my ongoing series of videos featuring the comic books I loved growing up in the 1960s and 70s. Only this one isn't. This one is a little different, but before we begin this all-new video, if you could take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications for new episodes, and leave a like and or a comment after you watch this video, it would be greatly appreciated. So let's spruce up the place a bit and get in the spooky season mood with a more appropriate background for this particular video and the resurrection of our second logo, Back from the Grave, featuring a font based on those great Marvel monster books of the late 50s and early 60s, one that emulates the lettering of the great Artie Simek. There. That's better. Let's start with a little movie history. In the late 1950s, horror was making a bit of a return to local movie theaters, and especially drive-ins. American International Pictures schlocky films, like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and its brother movie, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, were cheap successes. AIP also distributed Roger Corman's films, some of which had a horror bent, like The Raven, starring classic monster movie actors Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, and Boris Karloff. Great Britain's Hammer Films started their own series of Frankenstein and Dracula movies with Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula, known as just Dracula in England, both starring Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. The films launched decades-long franchises in gory full color. The teenage market went crazy for these films, along with AIP's output. In March of 1956, independent New York City TV station WOR, owned by RKO General, one of the bigger movie studios in the golden age of Hollywood, showed King Kong on TV for the very first time. The classic film's local ratings were incredible, showing an appetite existed for more classic, and not so classic, genre films on the home screen. In the late 50s, the traditional Hollywood movie studios were on the ropes. Thrown for a loop by both the court decree that made them divest themselves of their movie theaters and the rising popularity of television, some of the studios decided, if you can't beat them, join them. So in 1957, 52 pre-1948 films from Universal Studios were released to local TV stations in a package called Shock Theater. Columbia Pictures' TV arm, Screen Gems, sold the movies for Universal to the stations. The Shock Theater grouping included such classics as Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, Werewolf of London, Son of Frankenstein, The Wolfman, and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Shock Theater did a gangbuster business in every market it appeared in, but especially in the major cities like New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, sometimes boosting the ratings for their time slots from anywhere from 38% to an unbelievable several 100%. Shock's marketing campaign for the package included a press book, which included synopses of each film, sample scripts for on-air ads, and other info like actor bios. That spiral-bound booklet is a much sought-after collectible almost 7 decades later. A second package of 20 more films, called Son of Shock, was released in 1958, including The Bride of Frankenstein and the remaining Frankenstein sequels, The Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, and House of Dracula. Seeing all those Frankenstein films became my obsession, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The Shock Theater and Son of Shock packages spawned countless local TV shows, many of them on weekends and late at night. Some of them came with hosts like Roland in Philadelphia, who became Zachary the Cool Ghoul when he moved to New York, a slight variation of his real name. Marvin, Terry Bennett in Chicago, and Vampira, Mila Normie in Los Angeles, who was actually the first movie host starting in 1954, years before the shock package was released. She also co-starred in that unforgettable movie, Plan 9 from Outer Space, directed by auteur Ed Wood. Some of the shows kept the name Shock Theater, others were called by different names, such as Chiller Theater. Sometimes the hosts just introduced the films, and sometimes they inserted themselves into the films to pad out the time slot, but always all in good fun. Most of the stations I watched in the early 1960s didn't have hosts for their monster movie programs, so my first taste of late-night monster movies with a host didn't occur until I moved to Pittsburgh in the mid-70s to attend art school. That's where I first encountered Chiller Theater, which was hosted by local TV personality Bill Chilly Billy Cordill from 1964 until 1983, alongside his own cast of characters. The show was so popular in its Saturday night 11:30 time slot, the NBC affiliate WIIC, later known as WPXI, preempted Saturday Night Live for the show's first 4 years. Chiller Theater eventually followed SNL at 1 a.m. when NBC complained about it. As for my earlier monster movie viewing experiences, stay tuned for the story of my battle to actually see them. The monster movies on TV spawned endless merchandise, and one of the first things that grabbed the attention of budding monster kids premiered in 1958. Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, published by James Warren. It quickly became the Bible of the monster kid generation, and a magazine that served as inspiration for future filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg and Joe Dante, and authors like Stephen King and George R.R. Martin. That's publisher Jim Warren on the first issue cover, under the Frankenstein mask. James Warren was a publishing entrepreneur who was inspired by Hugh Hefner's Playboy magazine when it premiered in 1954 to publish his own short-lived magazine, After Hours. He wanted to do a version of Shock Theater on paper, with all those monsters and the host's puns galore. He chose Forrest J. Ackerman to be editor of this new magazine after Ackerman showed him a copy of a French magazine, Cinema 57, that featured monster movie photos. Warren tried to get the rights to reprint it, but the French text was very serious film lore stuff, not for the audience Warren had in mind for his one-shot monster mag, kids ages 8 to 16. Ackerman had also written a column for After Hours. Ackerman had an extensive collection of over 30,000 monster and science fiction movie photos to draw from, and wanted to call the new magazine Wonderama, but the distributor Warren lined up insisted that the word monsters be prominent in the title, and thus was born Famous Monsters of Filmland. It was originally titled just Monsters of Filmland. Warren had also suggested Fantastic Monsters of Filmland. Great painted covers by artist Basil Gaugus were certainly another selling point for the budding monster kid generation. The artist created almost 50 covers for the magazine over the years. After the first issue of the mag sold over 150,000 copies in the dead of winter 1958, Warren decided to make the magazine an ongoing publication. Ackerman signed on, and though he was listed as the editor, it was Warren that did the layouts for the early issues, designed and appeared on the first 2 covers, and made Ackerman's movie still collection and punny captions come to life. And Warren, in his own inimitable style, milked every bit of money out of the mag as possible, starting Captain Company and using the back part of FM to sell back issues of all his magazines, monster-related merchandise, and just about anything he could get his hands on. Hey, has anybody seen my monster foot? Famous Monsters proved popular enough to produce 3 paperback collections published by Paperback Library. The first, The Best from Famous Monsters of Filmland, came out in 1964, with the second and third volumes, Son of Famous Monsters of Filmland, and Famous Monsters of Filmland Strike Back, in 1965. Each featured over 150 black and white photos. I remember finding these on our local newsstand and being absolutely thrilled. Somehow the book format made FM seem more respectable, at least to bring home to my house, even though that Curse of Frankenstein cover on Volume 3 was pretty lurid, especially with its over 150 blood rare photos line. The monster craze had legs, and Warren published more genre magazines in the early 1960s, including a science fiction one called Spaceman, edited by Ackerman. Screen Thrills Illustrated, edited by Sam Sherman, featured articles on old serials and comic book characters who made the jump to action and adventure movies. Famous Westerns of Filmland, which became Wildest Westerns with issue 3, had its first 2 issues edited by Harvey Kurtzman, the creator of Mad, and featured Western movie stills with funny captions. Kurtzman soon left to create another humor magazine, Help, which Warren also published for 25 issues from 1960 through 1965. Spaceman, Screen Thrills, and the Western Mag all quickly folded and were replaced by another monster mag, Monster World, also edited by Ackerman. The first issue, published in 1964, included a look at the future for Warren. Monster Comics, a new form of storytelling featuring the Mummy, exclaimed the cover, and a comics adaptation of Universal's The Mummy, written by Russ Jones and illustrated by Wallace Wood, appeared inside. Warren had experimented with fumetti magazines in 1964, featuring adaptations of movies like The Horror of Party Beach, with the movie's story being told through photos, although laid out like a comic with word balloons. Wood had a hand in that mag too, followed by a similar mag featuring Hammer Films' Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula. Both mags were published in a series called Famous Films, with issue number 3 adapting that classic movie, The Mole People. But the comics format won out over the photos, and a second story by Jones and artist Joe Orlando appeared in Monster World 2, adapting The Mummy's Hand. A third one in issue 3, also by Jones and Orlando, featured an adaptation of Hammer Films' The Curse of Frankenstein. These comic stories in Monster World inspired a few more Warren publications that lasted a lot longer. In fact, Warren would soon become best known as the publisher of horror comic magazines, another byproduct of the monster craze. Numerous people were involved in the creation of Creepy, which also started in 1964, including Larry Ivey and the aforementioned Russ Jones, who gets credit as the founding editor of the mag. But Archie Goodwin was the main writer and eventual editor of most of the early issues, and the primary reason as to why they were so great, and reminiscent of the legendary EC Comics of the 1950s. Warren and Goodwin attracted a who's who of comic book artists to both Creepy and Eerie, including Reed Crandall, Joe Orlando, Al Williamson, Steve Ditko, Alex Toth, Gene Colan, and Angelo Torres, just to name a few. And of course, Frank Frazetta's amazing cover paintings on the early issues of Creepy were the proverbial icing on the cake. He returned to do some more covers later in the run, but had a sometime contentious relationship with Warren, as did a lot of people. Creepy was joined by Eerie in 1966, and Goodwin worked his magic there for a short while too, along with the occasional Frazetta cover. Vampirella, a character who was an active participant in her comics, not just one who introduced the stories, debuted in 1969, designed by Frank Frazetta with the basic design by Underground Comics cartoonist Trina Robbins. Warren's comic mags had their ups and downs over the years, with many added titles. Creepy lasted 145 issues until 1983, Eerie ended at number 139, and Vampirella at 112 the same year, when Warren Publishing went bankrupt, but all three were definite products of the Monster Kid era. Like all of Warren's magazines, Famous Monsters ended its original run in 1983, only to return in various incarnations with and without Forey Ackerman, who died in 2008. My favorite issue was definitely number 56, published right after Boris Karloff's death in 1969, and with my favorite Basil Gaugus cover. The brand name has changed hands numerous times and was published as recently as this year, with issue number 3 being the latest issue I could find, and the mag's title being just Famous Monsters, No More of Filmland, proving, I guess, that the monsters can even survive the death of print magazines. Famous Monsters' success also created the usual competitors, some good, most not so good. Even Marvel and Stan Lee got into the act with Monsters to Laugh With, a short-lived mag with photos from monster flicks and funny captions written by Stan, who liked doing stuff like that. But the best of all the competitors was Castle of Frankenstein. The sporadically published mag was Famous Monsters' main competitor, a more intellectual counterpart to the punny Acker mag, which my brother and I started buying with issue 2. It was a treasure trove of obscure images and great articles, and especially treasure-filled when an article on the Hammer Fu Manchu movies in issue number 11 included some topless stills from the film, not shown here for obvious reasons. Hey, I was a preteen boy, what can I tell you? COF, as it was known, also featured some articles about comic books, like an interview with Stan Lee and a profile of Jim Steranko, and early art by the likes of comic artists like Frank Brunner and future Warren cover artist Ken Kelly, shown here on the Barnabas Collins cover. He was the nephew of Frank Frazetta's wife, Ellie. A version of Castle of Frankenstein is still being published, looking pretty much like its 1960s predecessor, black and white on newsprint, and can usually be found in Barnes & Noble bookstores across this great land of ours. Magazines were the most prevalent merchandise in the Monster Kid era, appearing regularly on newsstands month after month for decades. But the Aurora model kits featuring the Universal monsters had to be among the most favorite items from that time. Frankenstein started off the line in 1962, and its incredible success, the unpainted plastic model kits sold for around 77 cents plus local tax, quickly spawned 2 more kits, Dracula and the Wolfman. More kits would follow, all released between 1962 and 1966, including The Mummy, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, King Kong, Godzilla, The Bride of Frankenstein, and, not shown here, The Phantom of the Opera, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Well, just Mr. Hyde, really. Oh, and that Godzilla model kit would become my own personal albatross, as we shall soon see. And let's not forget Aurora's gigantic Frankenstein kit, better known as Big Frankie, released in 1964 and retailing for a whopping $4.98. For many kids, myself included, this was the holy grail of Aurora models and was almost 2 feet tall once fully assembled. But at that price, plus you had to build and paint it yourself, I found myself denied the pleasure of having this big guy gather dust in my bedroom and scare me spitless every time I woke up in the middle of the night. The allure of the Aurora model kits was hard to ignore, largely due to the beautiful packaging. And while they were fun to paint and build, for most kids, but not me, as we shall see, the finished product rarely lived up to those beautiful box paintings by illustrator James Bama, most famous for his series of Doc Savage paperback covers, reprinting the classic pulp stories from the 1930s and beyond, which appeared on newsstands around the same time Bama was doing the Aurora kits. He painted an incredible 62 Doc Savage covers. You could barely be called an elementary school fashionista without that fashion-forward outfit, the Ben Cooper Frankenstein costume. I have an extremely vague recollection of having one of these. I'm not sure if this is the one I had or not when I went trick-or-treating. The mask was like a little oven with the piece of nylon wire holding it on your head, a bit of a torture device. And for the record, I hated Halloween. My first foray into it was a disaster when a future school teacher of mine demanded a trick before I got my treat. I wasn't prepared to, as he put it, tell a joke, sing a song, do a dance. I started crying, which probably netted me even more treats than originally planned, but I much preferred the neighbors who just handed you the candy, no tricks required, to get you off their porch. Other than the Classics Illustrated adaptation of Mary Shelley's original Frankenstein novel, essential for school book reports, there weren't a lot of monster comics being published in the early 1960s for monster kids to enjoy. The Comics Code Authority, after the horror-filled early 50s, put a stop to that genre. But there was another company that didn't subscribe to the code and who tried to cash in on the monster craze sweeping the nation. Dell Comics. In 1962, Dell had lost most of its popular titles when Western Publishing created Gold Key Comics, taking its most successful titles to the new company. Dell continued publishing comics, including a number of Universal Monster titles in their Monster Classics line, released in late 1962 into 1963, including Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Creature, and The Wolfman. They had atmospheric painted covers, and though they only lasted one issue each, the titles came in handy when Dell jumped on the Batman TV show bandwagon in 1966 and converted the famed movie monsters into hastily manufactured superheroes. Both Dracula and Frankenstein lasted multiple issues and were amongst some of the worst costumed hero comics of that era. Another of the more popular Monster Kid items were the Castle Films 8mm versions of the classic Universal Monster movies, the 1960s equivalent of home video. Most were silent and coming in various lengths. One had to have a projector to watch these films at home. I eventually got one, and after mastering the art of threading the projector so to avoid the bright light burning through the film, I almost always found the Castle versions to be incredibly disappointing. Like the Aurora model kits, the packaging was the best thing about them, at least for me, and I still have a couple of the Frankenstein versions just because of the box art, Son of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Before VHS, Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, and streaming, 8mm films were the only affordable product for budding movie collectors, with 16mm prints reserved for the true and much wealthier aficionado. But one of my favorite Monster Kid products of the early 1960s certainly didn't break the bank. It was a one-color, hard plastic Frankenstein figure from Mark's Toys. It was part of a set of 6 figures that included the Wolfman, the Phantom of the Opera, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Mummy, and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Sometimes, looking a bit like some of the Aurora kits, but without having to paint and glue them together, the original set appeared in a solid blue color, but have been bootlegged numerous times over the years in various other colors. I got mine at a funky store called Baxter's Bargain Store, a big multi-floor, bright yellow building off the main drag in my hometown, a store that didn't last very long if my memory is correct. I think they cost about 49 cents each, and I played with them endlessly. For some reason, I can't remember why, I loved submerging them in a big bucket of water on hot summer days on our back porch. Cheap thrills, I guess. Over the years, my originals disappeared, but I recently found one of the original blue Frankensteins on eBay for a reasonable price. So now it's mine, all mine, once again. I could go on for hours about many more Monster Kid products, and if I missed your favorite, I apologize, but let's cut to the chase. Here's the blood-curdling, absolutely terrifying true story of watching, or trying to watch, my local TV versions of Shock Theater in the early 1960s, when I was still single digits old. As I've mentioned numerous times on this channel, I grew up in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania called Tamaqua. Besides being famous for coal mining, Tamaqua was also pretty much where cable TV started. The town lies in between Scranton to the north and Allentown to the south, between 2 mountains, and a local entrepreneur built a tower on one of them and charged for the TV channels that tower brought into our homes. My dad, a huge sports fan, eagerly signed up for cable TV in 1962 and bought a huge color TV to mark this momentous occasion. We got the network affiliates, just CBS, ABC, and NBC in those days, in a timeshare type of deal from both Scranton and Philadelphia, plus some independent Philly stations, channels 17, 29, and 48, and, most importantly, 3 New York City indies, WNEW, Channel 5, WOR, Channel 9, and WPIX, Channel 11. I was able to watch WPIX's Chiller Theater on Saturday nights at 7:30, if I remember correctly, but this show featured some of the worst movies imaginable, even to a not-so-discerning preteen. Its content included schlocky Z-level horror films such as Frankenstein's Daughter, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, and that absolute classic that everybody loves, Plan 9 from Outer Space. Arguably, the stop-motion animated title sequence for Chiller Theater was scarier than any of the actual movies themselves. Philadelphia's WCAU, the CBS affiliate, had an afternoon movie show weekdays at 4:30. It regularly featured theme weeks such as the Tarzan series, 1950s monster movies, including the Creature from the Black Lagoon trilogy, Universal's big monster success of that era, and Abbott and Costello films, one each weekday for 5 days straight. And here my obsession began. Because one of the Abbott and Costello movies shown regularly was, of course, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello Meet Frankenstein, the last great hurrah of the original Universal Monsters movie cycle. Released in 1948, the movie featured Bud and Lou battling Dracula, played once again by Bela Lugosi, the Wolfman, Lon Chaney, and Frankenstein's monster, Glenn Strange. I immediately became fascinated with these characters, especially the lumbering monster, and my brother, 8 years older than me, started to tell me about a whole series of Frankenstein movies, with none of this funny stuff, that were scary and thrilling and wonderful. And so it became my mission, at the tender age of 7 or so, to stay up late on Saturday night to see the Frankenstein movies, all 7 of them. And it became my mother's mission to stop me. I begged, I cajoled, I offered to do household chores both of us knew would never actually happen. The answer was always the same. They'll give you nightmares. My mom still insisted I go to church with her every Sunday morning. After all, she was a Sunday school teacher. And with me loving to sleep in every chance I got, especially on weekends, she knew she'd never get me out of bed to go to church if I stayed up late to watch scary movies on TV on Saturday night. My mom was decidedly anti-monster, too. She had already thrown out my brother's copy of Famous Monsters of Filmland No. 2, which, you guessed it, gave me nightmares, undoubtedly due to this guy, publisher Jim Warren, once again in a mask and suit on the cover. But somehow, at some point, I was allowed to stay up to watch Frankenstein. In retrospect, easily the scariest of the Universal monster movies, in my humble opinion, on a Saturday night at 11:30. I believe it was the first movie on a double bill shown on Philadelphia's WFIL, the ABC affiliate. The moment came, the credits rolled, and I had already fallen asleep in my living room chair, only to be rudely awakened and told to go to bed, Gary. Looking at this as being a solid confirmation of her previous decisions, the battle was back on, and it would be months until my mom finally relented once again. This time, I think it was at my brother's urging to let me see The Bride of Frankenstein, undoubtedly the crown jewel of the Universal Monster series, that won her over. Director James Whale's amazing 1935 sequel to Frankenstein, which he also directed, was scary, funny, beautifully shot, and has great atmospheric music by Franz Waxman, and an incredible cast, including the uncanny Karloff at the height of his monster movie fame and going Madonna-like by just a single name in the credits, as the monster, and Elsa Lanchester, perversely as both the bride and author Mary Shelley, plus Ernest Thesiger as the creepy Dr. Pretorius, Dwight Fry as lab assistant resident killer Carl, and Colin Clive as the tortured Dr. Henry Frankenstein, miraculously still alive after being thrown off a windmill by his monster at the end of the first movie. I didn't fall asleep this time, and I loved every minute of this wonderful film. I had won the battle. I went on to see all the Frankenstein films, plus the other great Universal monster movies. I was hooked forever, and they're still my go-to happy place when it comes to warm, nostalgic feelings of my childhood that are film-related, along with James Bond and the Marx Brothers. Now, as I mentioned before, the Aurora model kits were the pinnacle for most monster kids in the 1960s. I was incredibly inept when it came to building or painting models, and my attention span was less than acute as a kid. So since I had won the movie-watching war, I persuaded my mom into buying me a Frankenstein model kit and hiring someone else to paint and build it for me. That someone else was a kid named Bobby, who was older than me and lived in my grandparents' neighborhood. He was well known far and wide for his model-making skills and his complete collection of the Aurora kits, all of which he painted and built himself. Unfortunately, the Aurora Frankenstein kit was sold out, so I went with Godzilla. The logic being, they're both kind of green-skinned monsters, or maybe my mom persuaded me because she thought a giant radiation-spewing lizard was better than a monster sewn together from the pieces of tissue of dead people, but I should have taken that substitution as an omen. So I counted the days until I could sit with Bobby and watch him paint and build my very own Aurora model. My mom offered him the princely sum of $5 whole to do this. So he must have been really good at it, right? Surely this would be his magnum opus, the greatest model he ever built, the one to retire on at the ripe old age of 12 or so. The day came and I joined Bobby at his basement workbench, surrounded by all the other Aurora kits he flawlessly built. I watched him paint the individual pieces and hurriedly glued together the model, his fingers stained with paint, which hadn't properly dried, and the model itself smeared with his fingerprints. Soon he declared it was finished. The coup de grace came when I was walking back to my grandparents' house with the disastrously completed model, gingerly balancing it on top of the box, and it collapsed from its own hastily built weight. My model-owning days were over, and Bobby had to answer to my mom. Not sure if she got that $5 back, though. The original 1931 releases of Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein are coming up on their 95th anniversaries, quickly closing in on a century of monster mania. Those movies, the ground zero of the Monster Kid generation, gained second and third lives on television and later home video, and have carved out their own niche in pop culture to last through the ages. The sensitive Karloff, the hammy Lugosi, the rough-around-the-edges Chaney, even the aptly named Glenn Strange, whose portrayal of the Frankenstein monster amounted to just outstretched arm and a shambling walk, are forever part of our world. For us monster kids, who grew up with them in movies, on TV, and their faces on piles of merchandise, they will be fondly remembered as beloved characters, not really monsters in any sense of that horrifying word, especially considering the world is filled with real monsters who are much scarier than any actor could ever portray in a movie. These days, I'm still a monster kid. I have a little Franken shrine of Universal monster toys and figures and old castle film boxes, alongside more modern artifacts such as Funko Pops and other things. I walk by it multiple times each day, sometimes just glancing at it, other times something catches my eye and I stop to appreciate it, lingering for a few moments. Like my comics-filled spinner rack, it brings me a great amount of joy, a collection of fond memories curated from my childhood, destined to stay with me for, well, forever, I guess, or however long my forever will be. I know I'll never be as immortal as Frankenstein, Dracula, and the other Universal monsters, preserved forever on film, for new generations of monster kids to appreciate and enjoy. But that's okay. I'm happy to pass that torch, as a fan, not a villager, on to someone else to enjoy. Thanks for joining me for this look back at my Monster Kid era. There are 23 other full-length episodes of Tales from My Spinner Rack here on our official YouTube channel, including our recent look at our favorite Fantastic Four covers by Jack Kirby, a recreation of my 2025 San Diego Comic-Con panel featuring special guests Mark Evanier and John Morrow. And there's more to come. Please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications for new videos, and tell all your comic book loving friends about this channel. And remember, your comments are always welcomed and appreciated. You can follow me on Instagram at Tales from My Spinner Rack, it's all one word, or follow my personal account at GG92118 with everything from travel pics from my recent trip to the United Kingdom to links to my monthly book reviews. Visit my blog at www.innocent-bystander.com for the first iteration of Tales from My Spinner Rack, featuring over 30 art-filled essays on the comics I grew up loving in the 1960s and 70s, like this very first one. Just click on any post on the homepage, then on Tales from My Spinner Rack in the category lists on the right side of the page, and scroll down for these older posts, which started in 2023, many of which have been recreated as videos here on YouTube. Stay tuned for next month, when we're planning something a little different. I hope. Thanks for watching. Good night.